It began, as many old stories do, with snow. Thick and soundless, it fell from a sky the color of ash. The mountains slept beneath it, trees bowed under it, and the wind whispered through the valley like a voice with no body, only memory. The villagers said it had been the coldest winter in decades. Some muttered about fox spirits or the turning of the old gods. Others just tightened their coats and walked a little faster past the edge of the forest, where the snow seemed to fall heavier than anywhere else. There, in a small wooden house near the base of a hill, a man lived alone. He was neither old nor young, neither bitter nor kind. The seasons had carved him quiet. His home was simple: one room, one fire, a cot, a low table. No mirror, no visitors. Only the kettle, the woodpile, the creak of snow-laden beams. Each morning he swept the steps. Each evening he folded the same blanket. His neighbors barely remembered his name, but the trees did. The wind did. And perhaps somewhere deep in the sky, so did something else. On the day the story truly began, he woke early. The wind had changed direction overnight. It was colder, sharper. He stepped outside with a bucket and paused. Not for what he saw, but for what he felt. Stillness. A kind he hadn't known in years. Not silence, but something quieter than that. He stood for a long time, staring at the blank stretch of white leading into the forest. Then, movement. Just at the edge of the trees, half buried in snow, something shifted. Softly, like a cloth in water. He walked toward it, cautious. It was a crane. A white crane, great wings bent awkwardly, its chest rising and falling too fast. Blood, stark red, dotted the snow beneath it. Its eye flicked to him, afraid, then dull. The man exhaled, and for the first time in years, he spoke aloud. "You're hurt," he said quietly. He knelt slowly, not wanting to frighten it. The crane didn't move. Its wing, broken. The feathers there were bent unnaturally, tinged with ice and streaked faintly with red. Its breathing was shallow, its head trembling. This bird was not long from death. The man removed his coat. He didn't think. Not of danger. Not of reason. Only that something warm should wrap something dying. The crane shivered as he tucked his coat around it. He could feel how thin its frame was beneath the feathers, like bones carved from hollow glass. For a moment, he simply held it there in the snow, and the world stood still. Then, he rose, lifted it gently, turned toward home. It weighed almost nothing. Inside, he stoked the fire high and laid the bird near the warm hearth, still wrapped in his coat. He boiled water, found an old cloth, and bathed the blood away with trembling care. He whispered nothing, only breathed with it, slow and quiet, so it wouldn't be afraid. Outside, the storm deepened. Snow beat softly against the shutters, like fingertips on a drum. The crane stirred, but did not try to fly. That night, the man did not sleep. He sat cross-legged by the fire, watching the bird, watching the small rise and fall of its breath. He remembered dreams he used to have, of flying over trees, of white wings cutting moonlight, and wondered if this was what it felt like to fall. At some point before dawn, the crane's head nestled against its body. Its breathing slowed, its eye closed, and for the first time in years, the man smiled. Days passed. The storm outside did not stop, but the house held its warmth. The man shared what little rice he had, pouring water into a shallow dish for the crane to drink. He did not speak often, but when he did, his voice was low, like wind through reeds. "You don't need to be afraid," he said once. And another time, when the bird shifted uneasily in sleep. "You'll fly again. You'll leave this place." He didn't know why he said it. Maybe he wanted to believe it himself. Each morning, he changed the bandage he had made from torn cloth. Each evening, he added a little more wood to the fire than he truly needed. Once, as he stepped outside to gather snow for water, he looked up and saw the sky was clearing. Pale blue, like something trying to remember spring. The villagers didn't visit. They rarely did. But one passing woodcutter spotted smoke from the chimney and said it smelled like warmth. On the 6th day, the crane stood. It was shaky but upright. The man watched from the corner of the room, heart caught in his throat. He didn't move. He didn't speak. He only watched. As the bird stretched one wing, still bruised, still weak, but full of light. And then it turned its head. Its eyes found him, clear, dark, and ancient. Not like an animal's, but something else. Something remembering him. The man lowered his gaze and bowed slightly, not knowing why. That night he left the window open just a little. When morning came, the hearth was cold. The coat lay folded beside the fire. The dish was empty. The crane was gone. He stood there staring at the open window, not knowing how long he had been holding his breath. The snow had stopped. The sky was wide and quiet. No tracks remained. Just a few white feathers near the doorway, trembling in the wind. He didn't know how long he stood there, staring at the empty hearth. The feathers near the door had caught on the grain of the wood, fluttering when the wind stirred. He knelt and picked one up. It was smaller than he expected. Soft, white, perfect. He turned it over in his hand, like a question. That day, he did not light the fire. The silence in the house felt deeper than usual. Not empty exactly, but recently full. Like someone had just stepped out of a room, and the air hadn't caught up yet. For 2 days, the man moved through his home without speaking. He left the window open, though snow still fell in faint, drifting veils. Sometimes he found himself glancing toward it, not expecting, not hoping, just waiting. He found the bowl where the crane had drunk. He washed it carefully, placed it back on the shelf, not because he needed it, because it had mattered. On the 3rd night, he dreamed. In the dream, he stood in the forest at dusk. The trees bent slightly, though there was no wind. Snow fell upward. In the sky above, a great white shape circled, its wings catching moonlight like mirrors. He raised his hand, but it did not land. When he woke, the room was cold. The fire had gone out. And then, he heard it, a sound just beyond the door. Not a knock. Softer than that, like the rustle of fabric brushing wood, or the sound of someone breathing outside, unsure whether to speak. The man sat up slowly. The feather was still beside his bed. Another sound. This time, more certain. A hand on the doorframe, and then 3 gentle knocks. The man rose without thinking. He didn't call out, didn't ask who was there. Something in the air had changed, not colder, not warmer, just tilted, like the house had taken a breath he hadn't given it. He opened the door slowly. A woman stood there, barefoot in the snow. Her kimono clung to her as if sewn from winter itself, pale, worn, touched with frost. Long strands of black hair drifted over her shoulders, tangled with snowflakes that did not melt. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, quietly as though finishing a thought she'd already begun, "May I come in?" He didn't answer. He stepped aside. She entered as if she already knew the way, each movement careful, measured, not from fear, but from understanding. She knelt by the hearth without asking, and set her hands near the flame. They were red with cold, yet she did not shiver. The man shut the door behind her. His heart beat slowly, but unevenly. "Are you lost?" he asked, though he wasn't sure why. She tilted her head slightly. "No." A pause. Then, with the faintest trace of something in her voice. Sadness, maybe, or memory. "I was looking for a place to rest. Just for a little while." He nodded. He did not ask her name. She did not offer it. The fire crackled gently between them. Steam curled from the kettle. The world outside no longer mattered. "I'll bring you tea," he said. His voice felt smaller than it should have. She smiled. Barely. Almost like it wasn't meant for him, but for something long ago. That would be kind. The fire burned low. She sat quietly beside it, her eyes half closed, her hands wrapped around the cup he'd given her. The tea had long since cooled, but she held it still, as if the shape of it gave her comfort. The man didn't speak. He moved about the room in small, unnecessary tasks, folding the blanket again, adjusting the kettle's position over the coals, checking the woodpile, though he'd already counted the logs that morning. He wasn't used to sharing space with another soul. But the silence between them was not awkward. It was alive, like snow falling just outside the window, steady, soft, unspoken. He glanced at her now and then. She wasn't looking at the fire. She was looking at the steam rising from her cup, watching it curl upward like she was listening to it speak. "You don't seem afraid," he said finally. She looked at him. There was a pause, too long to be casual, too short to be dramatic. Then, simply, "Should I be?" He opened his mouth to answer, but nothing came. The question hung in the air between them, weightless and precise. She turned her gaze back to the fire. "I'm only passing through," she added gently. "I won't stay long. Just until the snow lifts." The man nodded slowly. "I have extra rice," he said, "and firewood." Her lips curved into the faintest smile. "That's kind." She shifted slightly on the floor, drawing the hem of her robe closer. For the first time, he noticed a thread had come loose at her sleeve. Just one, thin and pale, hanging there like a strand of hair. He didn't know why it caught his eye. The fire popped softly. Outside, the snow kept falling. And inside, without either of them saying it, the house felt less empty than it had in years. The days passed without urgency. The snow softened. The wind slowed. And the rhythm of the house settled into something steady. They spoke little, but there was no discomfort in the quiet. She took to rising early. Sometimes he found her tending the fire before he opened his eyes. Other times, she stood near the window, watching the pale grey light stretch across the frost-glazed trees. He offered her food when he cooked, and she accepted with a small nod. She washed the bowls when they were done. That was all. No discussion, no instructions, just a quiet division of tasks that unfolded naturally, like water finding its path through stone. She never asked about his life. He never asked about hers. But when he fetched water from the well, she folded the blanket on the cot. When he swept the floor, she gathered kindling into a small bundle by the door. Neither of them mentioned these things. They simply happened. One evening, he returned from chopping wood to find the window shutter secured with an extra strip of cloth. The draft that had crept through the cracks was gone. He looked at her as she sat by the fire, a needle in her hand, the thread pulled tight in a quiet rhythm. "You sew?" he asked. "A little," she replied. He left it at that. They ate rice and pickled radish, the fire crackling between them. Outside, the snow had begun again, soft, slow, unhurried. Before sleep, she placed another log on the fire without being asked. He adjusted the kettle. Then they sat in silence, listening to the wind move around the corners of the house like it was trying to remember their names. On the 7th morning, she swept the floor. He had gone outside to gather wood, and when he returned, she was near the door. The broom moving slowly across the worn boards. She didn't look up. He said nothing, but the space felt different, lighter somehow. Not cleaner, just tended to. He set the wood down by the stove. Later that day, she folded the firewood again, sorting it by size. He noticed, but did not comment. Instead, he adjusted the kettle, sliced the radish thinner than usual, and served the rice with a little more care. Their days passed like this, quietly, gently. She moved through the house as though it had always belonged to her, not with ownership, but with ease, with attentiveness. The way someone moves through a place they respect. Once, while he washed the bowls, she reached across him to hang a cloth by the stove. Their hands brushed. Not long enough to matter. Not long enough to ignore. He glanced at her. She did not react. That night, she sat near the hearth, mending the cuff of her sleeve. He watched the thread pass through the fabric in small, deliberate motions. Her hands worked with care, but without decoration. Just enough to make it whole again. "You're good at that," he said. She looked up. "I've had practice." He nodded once, then returned to stirring the coals. The house felt warm, the kind of warmth that comes not just from fire, but from familiarity, from presence. Outside, snow continued to fall in soft sheets, piling high at the windows, as if trying to listen in. The house was warmer now, not just from the fire, but from something else. The kind of warmth that grows slowly, and only in quiet. They had settled into a pattern. Light conversation, long silences, a rhythm between two people who did not need to explain themselves. There was no urgency, just stillness, just snow. Then, one afternoon, as he finished washing the bowls and set them out to dry, she spoke. "I'd like to help." He looked over. She was seated near the window, her hands folded in her lap, her voice calm. Not eager, not uncertain, just steady. "You already do," he said. She shook her head gently. "Not enough. You've shared your home, your fire. I want to do something more." He paused, unsure what to say. She continued. "I can weave." The words sat between them for a moment. "You mean with thread?" he asked. She nodded. "If you have a loom, even a small one, I can make cloth." He thought for a moment, then disappeared into the back corner of the house. After some rummaging, he returned with an old frame, dusty, but intact. A weaving board, modest in size, long unused. "I haven't touched it in years," he said, brushing it off. "Since before." He didn't finish the sentence. She didn't ask him to. Instead, she stood, took the frame from his hands, ran her fingers along the wood. Not like a stranger, like someone greeting an old friend. "I'll need some time," she said. "And one condition." He raised an eyebrow. "You must never watch me while I work." Her tone was gentle, but clear. He hesitated. "Why?" She smiled faintly. "It would ruin the cloth." He stood in silence for a moment. Her condition wasn't strange. Not exactly. But it sat oddly in the room, like a word spoken in a language he used to know. Still, there was something in her voice, firm, but without threat, that made refusal feel out of place. "All right," he said finally. "I won't." She nodded once, satisfied. No more was said. The next morning, he found her near the hearth, arranging thread. Pieces of old fabric, fine strands of straw, even a few white fibers he didn't recognize. She worked without noise, her eyes downturned, her hands deliberate. He left the room while she wove. He did not peek through the slats. He did not press his ear to the door. When she emerged hours later, her shoulders were slack, her fingers pale from tension. But in her arms was a folded piece of cloth, light as breath, soft as air, yet strong enough to hold shape when lifted. He stared. It shimmered slightly, though there was no light on it. The weave was so fine he could barely make out the threads. No unevenness, no fray, just pattern, gentle curves like ripples across still water. "This is," he began, then stopped. She looked tired but not sad. "You may sell it if you'd like. The merchant in town might offer enough to keep you stocked through the next season." He didn't know what to say. He'd never seen anything like it. He wanted to ask how, what tools, what tricks. But her condition echoed in his mind. Do not watch. And so he didn't. He carried the cloth into town the next day. The merchant's eyes widened. By sundown, he had more coin in his pocket than he'd held in years. When he returned home, she was sitting near the fire, mending the same sleeve. She didn't ask how it went, but she smiled when he said quietly, "We won't be cold next winter." She wove again the next day, and the next. Each time she asked for privacy. Each time he stepped outside, or into the storeroom, or down the path until the wind swallowed the sound of the loom. When she returned, she brought cloth. Beautiful. Unbelievable. Each piece different, yet all bearing the same impossible threadwork. Light, fluid, patterned like water or wind. He sold the second piece, then the third. The coins stacked higher. Soon he had extra wood, new bowls, heavier blankets. The house felt fuller, warmer, softer. For the first time in years, he did not worry about the next storm. But with each weaving, she grew quieter. Her hands, always careful, now trembled faintly when she lifted the bowl at dinner. Her voice, already soft, turned almost to whisper. Her eyes lingered longer on the fire, and when she folded her hands in her lap, they seemed to rest heavier than before. He noticed, but said nothing. Instead, one evening he placed a small tray beside her at the hearth. Rice, pickled plum, and miso, more than usual. She looked at it, then at him. "You don't need to," she said. He shook his head. "I want to." They ate together without talking. Later that night, he passed the weaving room on the way to stoke the fire. He stopped, just for a moment, his hand resting on the doorframe. He heard no sound, no movement, only stillness. He moved on. He did not break his promise. But in the morning, he saw something he hadn't seen before. A strand of hair caught on the loom's corner. Pale. White. Not like hers. He brushed it away without thinking. But the image lingered. She sat by the window drinking tea. Her hands wrapped tightly around the cup. And when she looked out toward the trees, her face seemed very far away. Word began to spread. Quietly at first, just passing remarks from merchants and travelers, offered in lowered tones as they warmed their hands over tea. He's selling cloth again. Not just cloth, better than before. No one's seen him weave a thread in years. The man heard none of it. He didn't go to the village often, and when he did, he kept his head low and his visits short. But the cloth he brought spoke louder than he did. Too fine. Too perfect. Too much like magic. At home, he noticed small things. A child had left a paper crane folded on the path near the edge of the forest. The old woman who sold herbs looked at him longer than usual, her eyes not unkind, but cautious. And the merchant who paid for the third bolt of cloth asked, "Where is she from, this woman of yours?" He didn't answer. At night, the house was quiet as ever. But sometimes, when he lay awake, he thought he heard something in the trees. Not footsteps. Not wind. Something else. A distant rustle. A flutter. Like wings being stretched. She continued to weave. The pieces took longer now. When she emerged, she looked as though she had walked through snowfall with no coat. Pale. Hollow but smiling. Always smiling. He grew uneasy. Not fearful. Not suspicious. Just uncertain. Like someone walking across a frozen lake, not knowing if the ice beneath him is still whole. One morning, she did not come to the table. He found her resting near the loom, her back against the wall, eyes closed. The cloth beside her was nearly finished, threaded with white and grey, soft as breath. He knelt beside her and placed a hand on her shoulder. She opened her eyes slowly. "You're working too hard," he said. She gave a small, tired smile. "I want to give you something that lasts." He didn't know what to say to that. So he sat beside her, quietly, as snow drifted past the window in slow, deliberate lines. She wove again the next day, though he urged her not to. "You don't have to," he said gently. "We have enough. More than enough." She looked up from the loom, her eyes calm but tired. "Not for me," she said. "For you." He opened his mouth, then closed it again. There was no malice in her voice, no resistance, only something quieter than both. Resolve. Or maybe guilt. He nodded slowly. "All right." And again. He left the room. Out in the cold, he walked to the edge of the forest. The snow had hardened into ice crusts, cracking beneath his boots. He looked up, half hoping to see cranes flying overhead, but the sky was empty. Only clouds, low and unmoving. When he returned, she was resting near the fire. The cloth she had made that day was smaller than usual, but finer. He could barely look at it without feeling like it would vanish. He didn't ask how it had come to be. She served him tea that night with hands that trembled slightly. He watched her closely. The strength in her movements was fading, but she masked it well. Too well. "Why do you keep doing this?" he asked, his voice low. "Why give so much?" She turned the cup in her hands. For a long time, she didn't answer. Then softly, "Because it's something I can do, something no one else can give you." He wanted to protest, to tell her she was already enough, but the words felt too big, or maybe too late. Outside, the wind pressed against the house as though listening. Inside, her shoulders sank lower, and he realized he could no longer tell where gratitude ended and regret began. The next time he went to town, a merchant stopped him before he could leave. "You've brought cloth unlike anything we've seen," the man said, lowering his voice. "Other merchants ask about it. Nobles want more. They're offering double what you've taken." The man shook his head. "We don't need more." The merchant leaned in slightly. Then tell me, how does she do it? He said nothing. Ah, the merchant whispered. So there's a secret. It wasn't said cruelly, just knowingly, like the question had been asked before, and would be again. He walked home more slowly that evening. The trees felt closer, the air heavier. His pockets were full, but his thoughts were not. When he returned, she was already at the loom. He did not interrupt. He placed the money in the wooden box by the hearth and added a log to the fire. But something in the room felt different now. Not colder, just heavier, like the air had gathered weight. She wove for hours. That night she did not eat. Her hands were spotted with faint red marks, thin, delicate, like pinpricks. He noticed. She hid them. He didn't ask. But as he sat by the fire later, eyes fixed on the glowing coals, his thoughts returned to the merchant's words. How does she do it? He told himself it didn't matter, that it was hers to keep. But another part of him, quiet, unwelcome, wondered. Just once. Just to see. To understand. Not to betray. Only to know. He shook the thought away. Outside, the wind had picked up again. In the dark, somewhere beyond the trees, a single bird's cry echoed once, then vanished. He didn't sleep well that night. The room was warm, the blankets thick, the fire steady. But his thoughts wandered. Not loudly, not wildly, just enough to keep him on the edge of rest, turning small questions over in his mind like stones in a shallow stream. She had been with him for weeks now, maybe longer, and she had never once asked for anything in return. He remembered the first cloth, how impossibly light it felt in his hands, how it shimmered in firelight without shine. He remembered the second, the third, the fifth, and he remembered her hands, smaller now, paler, slower. He sat up before dawn and poured water for tea. She hadn't risen yet. That was new. He placed her cup by the fire and waited. When she entered the room, she moved a little more carefully than usual, but offered him a quiet smile. "Did you sleep?" he asked. "Enough." She took the cup from his hands and sipped slowly, as if measuring her strength against the heat. He wanted to ask more. To say, "You don't have to keep giving." To say, "You're enough, just being here." But something in her expression held him still. She was already far away, though she sat just a few feet from him. Later that day, while she was outside gathering snow to melt, he stepped into the weaving room. Just for a moment. Just to tidy the floor. That's what he told himself. The loom sat in the center, strands still threaded. Nothing unusual. Nothing magical. Just thread. Just wood. Just the faint smell of something, like feathers or ash. He backed out quickly before she returned. That night he sat longer by the fire, her empty cup resting beside his. And in the quiet he whispered aloud. Only once. Only to himself. "I don't understand you." The fire gave no answer, and neither did she. The next morning she didn't weave. She sat by the window instead, legs folded beneath her, eyes fixed on the horizon. The snow had lightened, but the world outside was still white, still wide. He offered her tea. She accepted it with a nod but didn't drink. He knelt beside the hearth and added wood to the fire, watching it catch. The kindling hissed softly, like breath held in a cold chest. She hadn't spoken since the day before. "You could rest," he said, not turning to face her. "For as long as you want." "I know." Her voice was quiet, not distant, just faint. He looked at her then. Her skin was paler than when she'd first arrived, her posture more drawn inward. And still, he thought she looked complete. Not fragile, not broken, just slowly fading. "You don't owe me anything," he said. "You gave more than enough." She met his eyes, and for the briefest moment something flickered in hers, a kind of sorrow too old for words. "It isn't about owing," she said. "It's about what I came here to give." He didn't understand. She stood, walked to the hearth, and laid her hands near the warmth. They trembled slightly, barely noticeable. He pretended not to see. "I'll weave one more piece," she said. "Just one." He turned to her. "You don't have to." "I know," she said again. "But I want to." He didn't stop her. He only nodded, knowing that whatever thread she was about to pull, it would finish something. Or undo it. That evening the loom stood silent again, and the room felt heavier than ever before. Outside, night fell like a slow curtain. Inside, the fire whispered. And between them, a promise stretched thinner than any thread either of them could see. She began the final weaving the next morning. She said nothing about it over breakfast. She barely touched her food. He poured the tea. She drank a little, her hands wrapped tight around the cup. Then, without ceremony, she stood, gathered the thread she had prepared days before, a mix of pale fiber and something finer, something whiter than snow, almost translucent. He watched her carry it to the loom. She turned before entering the weaving room. "Remember what I asked," she said. He nodded. "I remember." Her eyes lingered on him for a breath longer than usual, not with suspicion, not with fear, just pause, like she was leaving a part of herself behind before crossing the threshold. Then she stepped inside and closed the door. He stood in the middle of the room, listening. The sound of the loom came slowly, soft, rhythmic, not like the clatter of a normal frame. It sounded almost like wind moving through reeds or wings brushing against cloth. He sat by the fire but didn't stoke it. He stared at the floorboards, his hands resting on his knees. The room felt hollow without her in it. Time passed, uncounted. The light shifted. The kettle hissed. He checked the door once, not opening it, only standing near it, his palm resting flat against the wood. It was warm. He could hear her breathing, faint and steady, beneath the motion of the loom. He stepped back. Outside, the wind picked up. A single feather drifted past the window, white, long, perfect, and vanished into the snow. That evening she emerged. She looked thinner, paler, but calm. In her hands she held the final cloth, folded, perfect. It shimmered as if made from moonlight, and when she placed it in his arms, he felt as though he were holding something alive. "It's finished," she said. He looked at her. She didn't meet his eyes. "Are you all right?" he asked. She smiled but said nothing, and the silence that followed was not peaceful. It was waiting. He couldn't sleep that night. She had gone to bed early. Her steps slow, her body almost weightless as she moved across the room. He watched her pull the blanket over her shoulders and turn her face toward the wall. She did not speak. He lay beside her for hours, eyes open, watching the glow of the fire fade into shadow. Her breathing was soft, even, but he felt no rest in it, only absence. The final cloth lay folded near the hearth. He hadn't opened it. He didn't want to touch it more than he already had. It felt sacred or fragile, as though to unfold it would break something more delicate than thread. He rose before dawn. The snow had stopped. The sky was pale, stretched thin over the hills. The forest beyond looked sharper now. Less like a painting, more like a memory returned. He stepped outside, only for a moment. The cold bit at his fingers, but he didn't mind. He needed the air. When he returned, she was still asleep. He sat near the loom. It was quiet now. Still. But something lingered in the room. Some feeling he couldn't explain. Not scent. Not sound. Just presence. Like whatever had filled the cloth had left behind its echo. He stared at the loom for a long time. Then at the door. Then at the small seam of light beneath it. She had said not to look. He had promised. But he also remembered the marks on her hands. The exhaustion in her voice. The feathers he'd seen. And the questions he hadn't dared to ask. He wasn't thinking of betrayal. He was thinking of protection. Of truth. Of love, maybe. He stood, took one step forward, then stopped. And in the silence that followed, his heart beat louder than it had in years. He told himself he would only listen, not look, just listen. He stepped closer to the door, pressed his palm against the wood. No sound came. Not the whisper of thread, not the creak of wood. Only the slow thud of his own heart, louder now than the wind outside. He hesitated. Then slowly, carefully, he slid the door open by a fraction, just enough to see. At first he didn't understand what he was looking at. She sat at the loom, but not as he had seen her before. Her back was bare. Her robe pooled around her waist. Her skin shimmered, pale and impossibly smooth. And from her shoulders, something moved. Feathers. Long. White. Pure. They unfurled from her back like breath made visible, shaking gently with each movement. Not sewn, not attached. Grown. Natural. Terrible in their beauty. And her hands. Her hands were pulling the feathers from her own body, one by one, weaving them into the thread. No tool. No magic. Just pain, turned into cloth. Her shoulders trembled. Her breathing was shallow. She was giving everything, not from obligation, from choice, from love. He didn't breathe. He didn't move. But her head turned. Slowly, without surprise. She looked at him. Her eyes were not angry, only sad, only tired. "I asked you not to," she said softly. His throat tightened. I didn't mean... I know." She stood. The loom stopped. The silence pressed in. And in that stillness, everything broke. She stepped away from the loom. Her robe hung loosely over her arms as she moved, concealing the feathers, the red marks, the space she had tried to keep hidden. Her hands lowered slowly to her sides. The light outside the window had dimmed, though it was not yet evening. He stood there, frozen in the doorway. She did not look at the loom. She looked only at him. "I was the crane," she said, her voice quiet, steady. "The one you saved. I returned in thanks." He swallowed, his mouth dry. "I didn't know." She nodded. "You weren't meant to." The wind brushed softly against the walls. The fire in the hearth had died down. Only the soft crackle of cooling ash remained. She looked down at her hands, flexed them slowly. "I wanted to repay your kindness. But when I saw how you lived, alone, hollow, I wanted to give more than just cloth." She paused. Her voice thinned. "I wanted to give you warmth." He stepped forward, his chest tight. "You did." She met his eyes. "But warmth built on secrecy fades. And now you've seen the cost." He opened his mouth. Words tried to come, but none were large enough. "I forgive you," she said, before he could speak. "I always knew this moment might come." She turned from him, walked to the folded cloth, her last, lifted it gently, cradled it like something living. But I can't stay. The words landed without weight, but they changed everything. He took a breath. Please. She didn't answer. Not out of anger. Only because the thread between them had already begun to unravel. She didn't speak again. She moved through the house slowly, her robe pulled tight around her shoulders, her steps as soft as they had been on the day she arrived. But now they carried something different. Not weight. Not sorrow. Just farewell. He followed her but didn't try to stop her. Something in him knew it would be useless. Not because she would refuse, but because she had already left. Not in body, in presence. She gathered nothing, took nothing, left the house exactly as it was. At the doorway, she paused. Her fingers brushed the frame lightly, like someone remembering the shape of a place they once called home. The wind stirred her hair. The snow beyond had begun to fall again. Slow, steady, soft. She turned to face him. Her voice was low. I was never meant to stay. He shook his head. But you did. You lived here. With me. She smiled faintly. For a time. He stepped forward, hands half raised as if to reach for her. But he didn't. He couldn't. You said you forgave me, he said. I do. Then why? Because some things break the moment they're seen, not out of cruelty, but because they were only ever meant to be held in trust. She stepped past the threshold. Outside, the snow touched her shoulders, her hair, her robe. She seemed to welcome it, like it belonged to her, or she to it. He watched as she walked into the white, and when she was far enough away, her body began to change. Slowly, without drama. Her shape softened, her robe shimmered. Wings emerged. First one. He did not follow her into the snow. He remained at the doorway until the cold began to sting his hands. And even then, he didn't move. The wind had quieted. The clouds above were thick and grey. But still, no feathers fell. No shadows passed. Only sky. At last, he stepped back inside and shut the door behind him. The house was exactly as she had left it. The cup still near the hearth. The blanket still folded at the edge of the cot. The last cloth, her final gift, rested untouched on the table, shimmering faintly in the firelight. He didn't eat that night. He didn't sleep. He sat near the hearth, watching the fire burn low, then fade, then disappear. The room grew dark. The walls creaked gently as the cold returned. He did not light the fire the next morning. He did not sell the last cloth. He placed it in the wooden chest where he kept old things, tools he no longer used, a comb with missing teeth, a small tin of dried plum that had long gone hard. The cloth lay folded atop them like something sacred. The days passed slowly. He still chopped wood, still fetched water, still swept the floor. But everything moved slower, quieter, as if sound itself had softened inside the house. Spring came late that year. When the snows finally melted, he opened the shutters. Light spilled across the floorboards, but the house did not feel warmer, only emptier. The villagers spoke of him now and then. Said he had taken in a strange woman one winter, and that she'd left without a word. Some said she was a spirit. Others, a witch. Most said nothing. He didn't explain. He didn't deny. He simply lived. But each time the cranes returned in early autumn, circling high above the forest, he would look up, searching the sky for one bird that flew a little slower, a little lower, as if looking back. Years passed. The village changed as all places do. New roofs replaced the old. Paths shifted. Children grew into adults and stopped believing in the stories their grandparents told. But the man remained. His hair turned gray, his shoulders rounded. His hands, once firm and steady, grew slower. But he still walked each morning to the edge of the forest. Still stood in the silence there, listening. Not for voices, but for wind. For wings. He no longer sold anything in the market. No one asked why. And though his house had aged with him, no one offered to rebuild it. They respected its stillness. They said it belonged to another time. Some winters, the cranes flew higher. Some, not at all. But in the final winter of his life, they came early. A full flock, gliding silently over the hills, wings slicing through the dusk. He watched them from the doorway, his blanket drawn tightly around his shoulders, his breath misting in the cold. And as he watched, one bird broke from the group. It dipped lower, circled once, then again. And for a moment, a single quiet moment, it hovered just above the trees, its wings wide, its head turned toward him. He did not move. He only stood there, his eyes following its flight as it tilted once in the wind, just enough to show the soft shimmer of white along its side. Then it turned, and was gone. That night, he lit the fire one last time. He unfolded the cloth she had left, laid it across his lap, ran his fingers over the threads as though tracing memory itself. He sat there until morning, and when the sun crept gently through the window, warming the wood, he was still. Peaceful. Still. They found him in the chair by the hearth, peaceful, unmoving. A folded piece of cloth across his knees, his hand resting lightly atop it. No sign of struggle, no cold in the room, just stillness. The villagers buried him on the edge of the forest, where the trees opened to sky. A simple stone marked the spot. No inscription, only a carved feather. Shallow, clean, quiet. The house stood empty for a time, then a long time. The shutters loosened, moss crept into the roofline. But still, it stood, somehow untouched, as if waiting. Children grew up hearing the story, not the real one, but pieces of it. A man who lived with a spirit, a woman who turned into a bird, a cloth too fine to explain. They whispered it in the winter months, when the wind howled and the trees bent low. Some said she was never real. Others believed she still flew overhead, watching for kindness. No one truly knew. But when cranes returned in the colder seasons, circling high above the hills, one always seemed to fly lower than the rest, its wings longer, slower, more deliberate, as if it remembered the ground it once touched. And sometimes, in the wind that passed through those bare trees, if you listened closely, you could almost hear the soft sound of thread pulling through cloth. Goodnight.